Hi everyone, welcome to Career Downloads. My name is Manuel Martinez, where each episode I basically hit the refresh button and bring on a different guest to really learn more about their background, their experiences, and try to uncover any actionable advice or tips and tricks that they've discovered along the way that you can use to help you progress in your own career. So with that, for this episode, I have with me Liz DelSignore. And hello, Liz.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to kind of share a little bit about your experiences and your career.
So I've had an interesting start to my career. My first IT job, I actually got on a Facebook group. So I've always been on Facebook for a while, and I was like, at the time, so to backtrack a little bit, before I came into IT, I was self-employed for most of my 20s. And I did a math and science tutoring business for a few years, and I did web design, then I went full-blown digital marketing. I had an agency, and then I had kind of a mental breakdown, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore. It's affecting my mental health. And so I was like, man, what am I going to do with my life? Because, you know, I was only like 27, 28 when this happened, so still pretty young. And I'm thinking, well, what am I good at? What has like good career prospects? Like, what'll pay me well? You know, maybe not at the start because I'm getting in a new field, but obviously over time. And I was like, man, I've always liked computers and I've always been good with them. So I just was like, well, screw it, I'm going to IT. I did take a job initially at Dick's Sporting Goods and for like a seasonal, just because, you know, it was something in between. And I definitely used the employee discount. I actually got like a fat discount one time because it was over the holiday season. So I got a really fat discount on stuff on Black Friday because the store was 20% off. And I already got another 20%, well, 10 to 20 depending on the item. And so I got things for like 40% off for a friend of mine. And pretty much a couple days before Christmas, I had started working an IT job for about a week. I was like, bye, they pay me more. And what happened with the Facebook group was I posted in a couple of them, and they were pretty much MSP owners. And within like a day, I had like 5 of them in my DMs. You know, I was like, hey, I'm looking for this kind of role. I live in the Pacific time zone because people are all over the country and world. And one of them I started talking to, it's like, I mean, it was like we were just friends for ages, even though I just met him there. And he ended up hiring me. And when I say I have an unusual entry into it, it's because I didn't learn networking at first.
And when you say networking, is it networking like computer networking or networking with people?
Definitely computer networking, because I have the social one down pat. And it was always kind of my Achilles heel. It's always been my Achilles heel. Like, when I was about 11 or 12, I started writing code as a hobby, and I say I had like an abusive relationship with it, if you think about it, because I was like, sometimes that's all I wanted to do with my spare time outside of school. And then there were others I never wanted to look at a line of code again. And it was on and off, on and off, on and off. So it's kind of an abusive relationship with it. I got good at it, though, and I got one of my best friends out of this. His name's Bobby. And so I started doing that, and then I started like doing like automations with Power Automate. They call it Flow now, I guess. But I started doing all sorts of things like that, and then I started filling the gaps later for networking, because I was like, wait, like it didn't make sense to me, because I noticed, because I asked a bunch of people, I was like, is it weird that I can understand how to automate something, but I can't understand networking? And they're like, no, that's not like weird at all. It happens to a lot of people. So eventually I started filling it in more, and I can function, but I still don't like it.
Well, I mean, as really as long as you understand it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's the crux of it, right? Like, I started getting into networking for a little bit and realized I just don't enjoy it. Like, it's not something I want to do, but I understand it. can I configure routers? Can I do all that with switches? No, I could probably figure it out. But that's not something I want to do, but I at least understand now how it works. And I can talk to a network person and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. How do we do this?
Right, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. Like, my boss is the owner of the MSP I work for. He used to be like a director of network engineering, and sometimes I'm just in awe of like how much this man knows. Like, I wish I could have that aptitude. It's just not me, though. It's not how I'm wired.
Got it. So, I know we jumped in a little bit, but give me just a quick summary of what's the role you're in now, and what are kind of some of the responsibilities that you do in that role?
Well, so I'm a tech at an MSP. It's called Innovative Network Solutions. They've been around since 2002, so it's been 22 years. I was actually the first direct hire female technician they've ever hired. And January is coming up on 2 years. So I do everything from like a password reset to people calling me 8 o'clock at night sometimes. Like, it's not all the time, but every once in a while I get a panic text message at 8 o'clock at night that shift 4 is down. And I'm like, I don't know 100% if this is my problem to deal with. It might be shift 4, but I mean, like 90% of my day-to-day is, well, I shouldn't say it's not any one thing, but it's a combination of like account management, so people leaving, people coming into the organization. It's dealing with all sorts. God, printers are the bane of my existence, but I deal with so many printer issues. Like, my coworkers make fun of me for it, like, because they know I absolutely hate printers more than anybody in this office. And they're like, Liz, it's your favorite. It's a printer ticket. I'm like, no, you're not going to do this to me today.
No, I get it. Like, just printers, I've never enjoyed working on them. Even here at home, I fought for years to not have a printer in my house. I was like, I will pay Kinko's, I'll submit it online, I'll go pick it up. I do not want to deal with the printer. Eventually, I lost that argument to the CEO of the house, and she said, no, we're getting a printer. I'm tired of, like, sometimes, kids, I've got kids, and last minute assignment, she's like, they need this printed this morning because they got to go turn it in. I'm like, well, great, I guess we're doing this.
Right, and then there's, like, there's a decent amount, I'd say probably, like, half of it is desktop support, like desk side. So, I mean, there are things that are just easier for me to do in person versus trying to tell them how to do it over the phone or on WebEx or whatever. Like about a couple weeks ago now, someone decided to change the Azure policy in Intune, and it broke everyone's mobile email. Like, and we've had at least 30 people put in tickets, like, oh, this isn't working. And I'm like, well, it wasn't my fault. Someone else broke it. And this is why we're in this situation. And, like, I could send them the KB articles, but then, like, they also have to understand if you don't do one single thing, like, if you don't do it down to the letter correctly, every single step, like, it's going to mess up somewhere. And I think people kind of underestimate that. They're like, oh, I've done this a million times. And it's like, but have you? Right.
And at this MSP then, you mentioned like 8 o'clock at night, so is there an on-call? Is it a rotation?
We used to have like an on-call rotation, but like I have two phones, but I like every once in a while I might I might come out of Toastmasters. I'm in Toastmasters as well, and like this did happen one time where I came out of Toastmasters like 8 o'clock at night, 8:30 maybe, and I get a panic text message from one of the front desk managers. I'm like, can you guys just be calm for one night, please?
And so when you say Toastmasters, are you supporting them or are you attending Toastmasters? And for those that may not be aware,
what do you mean by supporting?
So you said you work for an MSP, so I wasn't sure if. Like,
oh no, we're not supporting them like in a business capacity. It's just outside. It's just my hobby.
Got it. And if you don't mind, can you explain to people what Toastmasters is, and especially if it's a hobby, just what it is and why you decided to join?
So Toastmasters has been around for 100 years. It was started by a guy named Ralph Smedley. in Southern California at a YMCA. And basically he started this because life happens and there's always a bunch of projects, there's always moving parts going on, and he realized that people couldn't communicate very well. So he actually started it more as a men's thing and to help them improve their communication and leadership skills. Well, now it's grown to 149 countries, over 360,000 members worldwide. Like, it's huge. You can go, Vegas is its own district. It actually separated from Southern California in 2019. July 1st, 2019, it separated. And it was fun because what happened was they actually, so Toastmasters is communication leadership. So it's not, like, there is a public speaking component, and I think that's what people know it for. But I've noticed it helps me communicate in other ways too, not just like in front of a crowd, where it's saved a lot of my relationships actually, because I can communicate better and I don't fly off the handle. But I joined initially because I didn't have any friends. And so I was like, well, shit, I don't have any friends, but I should also do something that terrifies me, which is public speaking. And this was like right around the time where I realized I had to start networking, and I was like, what do you mean I have to go up to people, just random people that are strangers, and like start talking to them? That absolutely terrified me, the thought. And so I kind of started doing both in tandem with each other, and I got really good at both of them. So I joined in like 2016. I took COVID off a little bit. I came back in October of 2022. And so it's been a couple of years since. I'm the vice president of education of my club. So there's a president and there's me. And basically I make like this monthly schedule. I sometimes have to be a peacemaker. It's fun though, because my club, we meet in a bar. We're called A Drink to That. We're one of the oldest clubs in Vegas. Like, the club itself has been around almost 50 years. So it's a lot of fun. We have like, we kind of have a reputation. Like, oh yeah, you're in A Drink to That. Like, we've had people that were former members that ended up going to win the world championship of public speaking.
Really?
Yeah.
And you're right. I think most people know it as like public speaking and understand that, but there's also a leadership component. There's a number of that. So originally, did you join just because you wanted to start networking for work, or kind of what drove you to?
It really was. I had like no friends. And like I was in a pretty good relationship at the time, but I was like almost low-key jealous that he had so many friends, and I was like, damn, I don't really have that, And I've had a weird life in general, but I was like, maybe like if I make friends, like a lot of these other things will kind of resolve themselves. Like, because people need a social network. Like, we're human beings, we're social animals. So that did actually help. So I actually lost my dad in my junior year of high school, and Toastmasters has made it to where I don't spend a Thanksgiving alone.
That's awesome. So you started building a social network, and now I'm going to kind of go back quite a bit here. So you mentioned that you started coding around 10, 11, you had that love-hate relationship. So is that when I don't want to say passion, but you developed a knowledge of technology? And then you mentioned you went and you did marketing for a while. So kind of take me from when you were 10, 11 years old doing coding to when you started your first job, and what kind of was that?
Well, my relationship with computers started much earlier. It was about 4. So my dad had this computer that we both shared. My mom didn't really use it. She didn't even own a laptop until I was in high school. And so, excuse me. So I was just screwing around on the computer quite a bit. By the time I was 10, I could fix a lot of things on it. And but like I said, by the time I was like 12, I started programming with it. So I've always kind of been like, well, how do I break this? How do I fix it? Kind of the tinkering type. That's just how my mind is. I like puzzles. I like figuring things out and problem solving. I think that's probably, honestly, the biggest driver to technology, because that's all you're doing every day is you're figuring out, okay, you have problem A and you need a solution. Whether that's a ticket, whether that's something like I'm working on, for a class or whatever the case is, like you're trying to get from one point to another and figure out how to get there.
And you continue that, I'm assuming, just as a side hobby. Did you eventually decide to go to school or college for, you mentioned you went into marketing, so kind of what did you kind of do after high school?
Well, that's another side quest. So I took a year off between high school and college. I didn't initially if straight out of high school I would have gone into finance. I wouldn't have gone into technology right away. I took a marketing class in high school. I liked it, but I've always liked numbers, or at least since high school I really developed an affinity for numbers. And so I changed my mind a lot, and then I would have gone into finance first, and if I changed later, that would have been another thing. But then I took a sharp left turn, and I decided to try going to MMI, Motorcycle Marine Mechanics Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. And there's another one in Orlando, and I'm like, well, I'm going to go to the one on the West Coast. I can drive there, 5 hours. And so I did that. I got into a kind of a terrible relationship along the way, but anyway, I came back out of that, moved back to Vegas, and I started college, and I went to computer science, and and it was actually calculus that made me change course. It wasn't actually the math, it was the instructors, because the instructors barely spoke English, some of them. A couple of them were really rude, and I was like, I'm done with this. So I was like, well, what am I going to do? So I went into trying to do business. I went to UNLV for 3.5 years. Then I stopped. I went to Colorado Technical online for a couple terms. Then I really stopped school for 4 or 5 years. And then when I got my first IT job again, towards pretty much the end of 2022, I kind of got those things in tandem with each other. I was like, I should probably get a degree at some point. So I figured, well, I'll get an IT degree because that's what I've chosen. And I did really well at it. I got my associates in May, so hence I'm taking your class in 300 levels.
So that's funny, right? Because I think I was doing a computer science degree as well, and calculus, once I took calculus, that's when I changed my degree as well, and I went to...
Don't blame me.
I went to MIS, and I remember, same thing. I love math. I love numbers. That was my thing. I disliked that class because I was teaching myself. I was falling behind, right? You have all these other classes, and I was like, I'm trying to understand it and figure it out myself. And calculus, I mean, I'm sure there's people that can teach it to themselves, but I was not that person. I cannot teach that to myself, and I said, nope, this is not for me. I'm switching.
I probably could if I had the time, but I didn't have the time.
Right. So then you go through, you're doing all this, and at what point does marketing come in? So you get your MIS degree, you got your business degree?
I actually don't have any kind of degree except for the associates I just got in May.
Got it. Okay. So then after you had gone through and you decided, hey, computer science is not for me, you took all this...
Marketing is a funny story. So I was a math tutor at the time, and I met this guy, Matt, at a networking event, and he's since moved across the country. I think he went to New York or something, but this was 9 years ago almost. And he was like, oh, I need a website for my business. And so I just I kind of just came up with a random price tag, and he agreed to it. And I definitely should have charged more, but I was like, oh, well, I'll build it for you. And I just did a simple website. I built this thing from scratch. And he was like, and then he calls me a week later, and he's like, oh my God, I've got more students that I can handle now. We both were math tutors too. And he's like, you got a talent for this. Why don't you do it? So I thought about it. A few months later, I'm like, fine, go on to Secretary of State, get another business license and start doing it. And that's kind of how that happened for 5 years.
So after just building him a site made you, he had so much business.
And then I just started doing websites. I started managing people's social media, doing SEO, everything. I was just kind of figuring it out on my own.
Really? That's interesting. And outside of So you didn't do a tutoring business, it was a...
No, I did both for a while.
Oh, you did both. Okay. So then how did you grow that marketing business?
Pretty much, well, since I had already been, I built a really big, like, professional network. And, like, to this day, it's, like, one of the better things I've done with my time in life. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, I don't care what industry you're going into, you need to build your social network because you never know when you're going to need them. And I feel pretty lucky and fortunate that if I get into any kind of weird situation, I can probably make a phone call or send a Facebook message to get myself out of it. And that's pretty awesome to be able to say. Because I just know so many people. And it's not just here, it's like around the country too. Like, because, you know, I've been involved in politics, and of course that just takes everything national as soon as you start getting really involved. But it was mostly based on, like, referral. So, like, I did some, like, paid advertising, but honestly my better customers were always referrals.
And all that network, so did you build that? It sounds like a combination of Toastmasters, your business, and was that the primary reason? And then it sounds like it's at some point you got into, like you said, politics. So just over time, this is something that's grown from, you know, at what point did you realize to yourself that this is something that's of value?
When people started telling me I had talent, like, you know, it started with Matt, and then, like, people, like, I would say that the end goal, you know, obviously, whether it's building let's just use it like building a website. When the customer is happy and the DNS is changed and it's theirs, it's a high. like for me, it's a high. Like it's that validation of, I did that, they're happy, I got paid, next, you know, move on to the next. And, like, I think any creative person's gonna probably be able to relate to that. You know, you put your work out into the world, whether it's a musician, whether it's a photographer, like, you put your work out into the world and it gets recognized, it gets validation, it feels good.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's that dopamine hit of just like, man, this feels awesome.
Yeah.
And where did you take that? I mean, how did building the websites lead you into getting into politics? Were you doing the marketing for them, or?
I actually got involved in politics around 14, and so my freshman year of high school, and it was during Obama's first run for president. I mean, you know, because that's apparently dating people now. You know, people are like, oh, Biden or Kamala, and I'm like, no, let's turn back the clock a while. But I actually got involved in Young Democrats, like, when I was really, like, my freshman year of high school. It was mostly because I wanted something to do. You know, it happened to be, like, on a day that my dad could pick me up from school, you know, a little bit later, and he could swing it. So I was like, okay, this seems fun. Like, I didn't think it was going to be anything, honestly. I was just, you know, 14, you're like, well, what am I going to do? It's just fun. And I got super involved. I've actually got involved in all three parties at one point, both the Democrats, the Republicans, and the Libertarians.
And what is it about that was exciting to you or made you want to go? Was it the networking? Was it dealing with people?
It was kind of like a mix of both, and, like, just, like, dealing with all sorts of different situations. It was kind of fun. Like, I'm kind of a little bit of a thrill seeker. So the more excitement and variety I can get, like, the happier I guess I am. One time I met Ted Cruz when he was on the campaign trail, and I remember I had to deal with the media, which they're strong personalities. They were like, I want access to him now. I'm like, not past his security detail, you're not.
Wow. I'm sure that's...
I actually had a security detail take a picture with him. I was like, hey, can you take this picture? And I handed him my phone, and he's like, sure. So I got a picture with Ted Cruz by a security detail.
Nice. And so what kind of transpires after that? So I'm assuming you're doing all of this marketing, you're picking up tech skills, you're building websites, SEO. Where does that lead you, or what?
So in 2016, July 2016, it was like right after the 4th or so, I changed my party affiliation to Libertarian. And by January, I think the state convention was the following year, I got involved initially as a webmaster, and then the IT director at the time was living in Reno, and he was like, I've always thought it should be someone living down south, meaning Clark County, because like most of our population in Nevada is here. And so within like a couple months, he made me IT director. So I was IT director for the Libertarian Party of Nevada for like 3.5 years. And then I started going on Slack, because National had this Slack that people were talking to each other. So I started talking to people from all sorts of different states, and I started networking with the IT people, with the state chairs and everything else. And then I ended up actually getting involved in the National Party at some point. So I actually did a Google to 365 migration for the National Party, just not that long ago, like end of 2023, just before I would have started that spring semester. Well, I bowed out because I was like, look guys, I gotta take capstone next semester, and it's gonna eat all my time, like all of it, and it did. 100% it did. But I helped them do that, and pretty much like it's called the Information Services Committee at the National Party, where a chair is appointed committee. So every couple years you have the turnover of the executive board, the Libertarian National Committee board, and then the chair appoints a few people, and according to the bylaws, like 2 of them have to be on the LNC, things like that. And then pretty much the first meeting, we're like, okay, who's going to be the chair and who's going to be the secretary? Like, those are the only 2 roles we need. So I ended up the chair one time under one chair. And then the next one, she asked me, do you want to do it again? And she pretty much, like, the second time, she pretty much handed me the reins. They put out the applications, and she sent them all to me. And she's like, here, pick who you want, and I'll appoint them. It turned out really good, actually.
And is that just based on the confidence they had in you?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because like she's seen me under a couple different chairs. Like one of them, he got ousted, to say the least. It's a long story and a lot of drama there, but. And then there was an interim chair. I didn't have any problems with her. But then when the next duly elected one came around, I'd got to know her a little bit, and she trusted me. She kind of came up to me at the convention. She's like, do you want to just do it again? And I was like, yeah, like if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
And all this time, as you're kind of building this trust and relationship, I mean, what is it about it? Is it the work that you're doing? Is it your communication skills? Like, what do you think really attributed to you being able to establish that type of relationship long term?
I would probably say it is, like, because I don't shut up, and, like, I build relationships with people. Like, I don't go into anything really expecting, like, I've never gone into it expecting a sale kind of thing, or something out of people. I've always just taken people as they are, and if I get something out of it, then that's cool. If I don't, then that's fine too. Like, if what I get out of it is, like, we go to a bar a few times, like, that's totally fine with me. But I don't go into it with any expectations, because I realize people are people. And, like, the ones that stick around, they do for a while. And it's kind of my dark sense of humor, too. But they come to find out that I am someone who's actually knowledgeable, and I don't just stagnate. I'm always like learning new things. I'm learning new ways to do things, and people come to expect it about me, and it's easier for them to put trust in someone that they've known a while versus someone they just met off the street.
That makes sense. And a lot of this change over time. right? If you went from like not really having many friends, not talking to a lot of people, to now, I mean, you're conversing with everybody.
Yeah.
How much of that from Toastmasters and really forcing yourself to kind of get, uncomfortable? Because in IT,
Right.
there's a lot of people that just, hey, I just want to go, and it might be okay for certain roles, like if you're a developer, like and you just sit in front of code all day, but even then, maybe you're not doing public speaking, but you still have to talk to other people and establish, a way to be able to communicate with others. So how did you really go from not really talking to anybody to having this? I mean, I know you mentioned it, it's Toastmasters, it's really forcing yourself, but is it that? Does Toastmasters tell you to do and go, hey, go talk to these people?
No, I mean, I had to do that on my own. Like, they give you the skills, but, and like, you have roles within a club every meeting, but to go out and just network for its own sake, like, that was all me.
And how are you just going and saying, hey, I'm just going to go out to a bar, I'm going to do this at the grocery store?
Well, I mean, sometimes it happens at the grocery store. I mean, like I said, I don't really shut up anymore. Like, my friends tell me I can't take you anywhere because you just talk to everybody. And I'm like, yeah, you're not wrong. Like, it's I'm neurodivergent. I'm ADHD and autistic, so sometimes just things fly out of my mouth and people are like, what did you just say? And like, I get people with humor, or like, honestly, I get them with humor. It's something dark comes out of my mouth, something inappropriate comes out of my mouth, and they're like, what, they're doing a double take with me, and they're like, did you just say what I think you did? And I'm like, I did, and I have a huge grin on my face because I don't care. So, like, that's what gets, like, a lot of people is, like, the dumb humor, the raunchy humor. And it, like, and you get people to like you faster if you make them laugh. Honestly. Like, why do you think comedians get famous now?
And that works in social settings and things like that, but do you struggle in the workplace environment?
I wouldn't say I do. Like, there's all but one coworker I talk to pretty much constantly, and the one that he's just quiet. And so, and he's kind of, I don't want to drag on him too much, but he's kind of boring. Like, doesn't really celebrate holidays, or like, he if he really wanted to, he could participate in my conversation. I wouldn't care. I barge into people's conversations all the time, whether they like it or not. But it's a matter of like, well, do we get along? And I get along with most of them. There's always gonna be one. It's a pretty small group, so sometimes it gets a little quiet in the office, but otherwise I'm running my mouth, and I'm always the one making everybody laugh. I'm the class clown, I'm the work clown, I'm everything clown, like. Actually, my project management instructor this semester, she got tired of my BS within like 5 minutes. because so what happened was, she was like going over like a risk register and project management, and she used a landscaper as an example, and she put rain. So she's like, well, what is something that would be a trigger for rain? And I said, well, usually it's getting your car washed. And the class laughed, and she was not having my BS. But she took it like a champ, though.
Wow. And how long did this transition take for you? I mean, I would think that it wasn't overnight, right? I mean, you're not just sitting there one day like, oh, I went to one Toastmasters meeting, and now all of a sudden I'm like the most entertaining person. I'm the center of attention. I'm going through.
I was scared out of my mind when I first joined Toastmasters. Like, I gave my speech, and I was shaking at my knees. So the first speech is called the icebreaker, and most speeches are 5 to 7 minutes in length, but the icebreaker is 4 to 6, and you have 30 seconds padding on each side. So it could be like as low as like 3:30 or up to 6.5. I didn't get the green card, which is the minimum time of 4 minutes. I went like 3 minutes and 31 seconds. Because I was so terrified when I gave my first speech, and like I barely moved on the stage. I had like almost no vocal inflection. I mean, I was just trying to like survive through it. So if I can go from like this scared little 22-year-old, just shaking out on my knees, to I can make masses of people cry because I'm evoking that much emotion, and I can do it without even like I don't even write my speeches anymore. I just don't. Like, it just comes off the cuff. And it's funny that I say that because one of the earliest times I did my best speeches, there was a PowerPoint, but I didn't really prepare what I was going to say. And then I started getting the feedback. That was like the best speech you've ever given. And I was like, I didn't even prepare it. What are you talking about?
and that might be why, right? Because it didn't feel scripted. It didn't feel like you're like robotic about it. I'm sure you were just talking to a topic as opposed to like, I'm going to cover these bullet points, and it wasn't boring. How long from when you started that shaking in your boots to that presentation? What was that time frame? Like years,
6 months?
6 months. So it didn't take that long at all to kind of...
Well, I just didn't have time to prepare either. Like, that was part of it. I just didn't have time. I was doing so many other things. I was like, crap, how am I going to do this? Well, I'm winging it.
And how often were you going to Toastmasters? Is this like a weekly thing?
It depends on the club. So the first club I joined was bi-weekly. It was the second and fourth Monday. It used to be called Vegas Young Professionals Toastmasters. Now it's called something else. And then the one I'm in now meets weekly. So, and according to bylaws, they have to meet at least monthly. So they all kind of vary. I would say most of them meet weekly. It's kind of odd to find one that only meets bi-weekly. They're all over town. They're all over the world. I mean, I've literally traveled, and I found Toastmasters clubs like in different places. Like I went to Dallas one time, it was San Antonio. And I managed to do a speech at a different club there because, I arranged ahead of time. I was like, hey, I'm going to be in this area, and I know that this coincides with their meeting. Can I give a speech? Do you have room for me on your schedule? And they're like, yeah, go ahead. Come on in. And so that's how I actually got to Distinguished Toastmaster so fast, is because I was doing things like, when I would travel, I would give speeches. There were times like within business networking that, I found out that I can, if a Toastmaster is present and I give a speech, I can count it towards my progress. And so I would drag somebody from Toastmasters with me to one of my business meetings, and I was like, hey, can you fill out the evaluation form so I can get credit? And they're like, no problem. And I got like 4 or 5 speeches done like that just because I just had the opportunity.
So it's a point system or a progression system?
So we used to have a manual system. So we used to work out of like books, right? So the first one was called Competent Communicator, and then there was another one called Competent Leader. And then after that, you started getting advanced manuals. So Competent Communicator had 10 speeches, like fundamental, like the icebreaker, like one of them was like organize your speech. So you had to make sure it was like organized. They had different objectives, each one. Well, that went away. Now we have what's called pathways. And the best way I can describe it is it's like going through college. So you have 5, so in each path, it's like a major, right? And so there's 5 levels within each path. The first 2 are mostly the same across all paths. So that's like your 100, 200 level classes, your gen eds and things like that. You go to levels 3, 4, and 5, and then that's like your upper division. That's how I explain it to people, because if you're not in Toastmasters, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, but when I put it to school, they suddenly understand. So that's how it works, and there's different paths. By the time you basically have to complete 2 paths, you have to do some leadership stuff, and then you get your Distinguished Toastmaster under this new system. But when they were changing it, they were like, you have until this day, like in 2020, to get all of your educationals done under the manual-based legacy system. I was already well in advance, and I was like, you're not going to take all my progress away from me. It's not going to be wiped clean. So I bum rushed it as fast as I could, because I was, I had to do like a year of area director, which is like you're overseeing, anywhere between 4 and 6 clubs, and, have to run like the speech contest at that level and all these other things. So I pretty much went gung-ho. Like, I was like, I am getting this done, hell or high water. And I did. June 20th, 2019, I finally got it. But I did it fast, like, when I think about it. Like, if the average ambitious Toastmaster is taking 5 years to get this, I did it in 3.5.
I didn't realize it was that long of a process.
It can be. And that's, like, ambitious. Like, there's people who just never get the distinguished because, maybe they take long breaks and they have to rejoin the organization. But, yeah, I would say about 5 years is what people tend to average it. But I just went all out.
And that's just a combination of doing a certain amount of speech types and presentations?
Yes, like different speeches. I had to do like, it was called a high performance leadership project. In a way, it's like a capstone, in a way. Like, because you're having to do some sort of project that involves like pretty much everything you've learned as, up to that point, like how to deal with different kinds of people, how to manage them, like how to accomplish some sort of goal. Like, it really is, like, in a way, similar to a capstone. And so you could do it on anything you want. It just had to involve, like, a certain number of Toastmasters members. You could involve the public if you wanted to. Like, there was so much freedom in this that, like, it's not even funny. And so I forget what I did mine on, but it took me at least a few months. Like, it's supposed to be something you can do in the span of, like, a few months-ish. Otherwise, it's just too hard to track, right? But I got it done, and it was a good amount of work. And, you submit everything. So basically, you were submitting all your leadership stuff and then your communication stuff. And at the point you got 2 different credentials, you would the Vice President of Education would submit for your Distinguished Toastmaster. So they kind of like convexed into one thing, and then you get that. And when you get it, International sends you a plaque that you hang on your wall.
Nice. So that's I'm pretty sure that's a pretty big honor, right?
Yeah, it's hanging right by my front door.
People walk in and be like, oh, Distinguished Toastmaster.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll kind of get off the Toastmaster subject here now for a little bit. As you're going through, you're doing all your marketing, you're building, your communication and leadership skills. Where do you take that? So you're doing political, you're doing your own business. What kind of transpires, and how do you, what's the next thing that you do from there?
Well, I've pulled back all of my political commitments. I just don't have time. I'm like managing school. I'm doing a full-time job and relationship, Toastmasters. I mean, it's a lot. Like, I used to be really bad about overwhelming myself, and now I'm like, no, if I have a few things, I'm good.
And how did you learn that? Was it just, did you get burnt out?
Yes.
And is that so when you mentioned before, like the burnout from marketing, was it really the burnout from marketing, or was it the burnout of you're doing way too much?
So it was a little bit of both, but the first time I really hit burnout really bad, I remember it was probably right around this time, like middle of September. I'm sitting on my couch. It's like 3 in the afternoon, and I just broke. I sobbed. Like, I could not take it anymore. Like, it just came out of nowhere. Like, I was so overwhelmed. I had too much going on, and I couldn't take it anymore. I mean, people have a breaking point. And I remember just sitting there with my cat, and I eventually called this woman named Nicole, who I met through networking. She's become like my second mom. And I was like, I need to talk to somebody. And she dropped everything, and she was there within like an hour. Like, and she stayed at my condo for like a couple hours, and obviously she's like, well, I got my own kids to go home to, but like, and we when we met in networking, she started joking, oh, I should adopt you, you're so smart. And then now I call her my second mom. That's how that happened. But it just, like, it was that point where I was like, I can't do this. Like, I need to start changing something. And then when I finally went from marketing to IT, I had a similar breakdown, but it wasn't necessarily for the same reason. I was in a pretty good relationship at the time, and like he made me realize like maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. Like as far as like the self-employment thing, like maybe I should probably start focusing on my relationships more. Like the ones that matter. Colleagues of various levels of knowing them, it's like fine, whatever. I'll see you when I see you. But like when it's somebody that means a lot to you and you're like in a romantic relationship with them and they're making you like reevaluate your life choices, that's when it really hit me. I was like, I need to do something different. So I went changed industries and everything else, and I can't say I regret it at all.
That's good to hear that, that you were able to kind of get past that. And I'm sure at the time it was tough, but after you went through that breakdown, from being overwhelmed, what did you take out of it apart from just, I'm doing too much? Like, do you feel that after that you came out better? And I know at the time it probably felt like it can't get any better.
I definitely got work-life balance once I started going back to employee. And that was like my biggest thing is like I was always working like when I was self-employed, and it's like it's fine when like you're young and you don't really have anything tying you down, but then you're starting like, oh, maybe I should like have some work-life balance. And because it really hits when you start missing people's birthdays, you miss people's funerals, you start missing the weddings. For what? Chasing the bag? Like, I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like, in the grand scheme of life. Like, sure, like, you can be career-driven, but when you start missing people's milestones, that's when it hurts.
That's probably the biggest takeaway that you got out of it. Is just like, hey, it's fun to be an entrepreneur. It's fun, hey, I'm making good money. It's not always, I know sometimes it's glamorized, right? Like,
oh,
hey,
for sure.
Work for yourself, and it's amazing. It is, but you have to understand that there's a trade-off.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Like I have a cousin that, he's very successful in business, but there is that trade-off. He knows that, like, and his kids know, there's no weekends for him. It's not not like, hey, it's Friday, and, what are we going to do for this weekend? It's very different.
Mm-hmm.
So that drove you to be go back to the employee. And when you did that, what was the process? Were you just putting out resumes? Were you networking?
I mean, I was kind of networking and like, applying, but it was weird at first. Like, I was like, man, I have to do a resume again? I haven't done this in forever, because usually it was to show people my portfolio, and then that would get me work. But, so I'm like, all right, fine, whatever, I'll do the resume thing again, and not gonna lie, it was weird for like maybe a couple of months, like, God, I gotta keep this guy happy to keep my job. No, my boss, like, I love my boss to death. He's like one of the coolest people I know, but, and even my former boss, like, I'm even friends with my former boss still. we're like around the same age. Like we still talk and everything on Facebook. But it took me a while to like psychologically adjust to having, instead of being the head honcho, that someone else was above me. I would say like 99.9% of the time I agree with my boss. Like maybe 0.1% we have a slight disagreement and then I'm over it.
And that transition from being, the boss to being an employee, how was it relatively easy just because of the fact that you'd been to that breaking point, as opposed to like, oh, it's not like your business failed, right? I mean, it was successful. I mean, you were able to maintain and support yourself through that way. So it's a different shift. So was it pretty easy because now you're like, well, I don't have all these additional responsibilities?
Yeah, for sure. That, and like, it's also just the fact of who it was. Like the fact that I'm still friends with my former boss should be telling that, like, I have no hard feelings towards the guy. And even, we still like talk shop every now and then too. So I think if it was for like anyone else, it would have been different. But because I became friends with him and because like I got like that working relationship with him, and honestly, I kind of changed a lot of his business. You're probably gonna laugh at this, but like when I first started my last job, I was like, so what kind of documentation do you have that I can learn from? He's like, what documentation? I was like, Riley, we're gonna have a conversation right now.
Well, it's a small MSP, right? And I've seen that most times in these smaller businesses, like that's not a thing.
Right.
Right? You get to some of these bigger companies, like, oh, there's process, there's procedure, there's, a training period, and here was it just figure it out?
Yeah, I was kind of just thrown into the deep end at first, and then like obviously he did help me along the way, but those first couple of months were kind of rough because I was like, what am I doing?
You did it anyway.
Yeah.
And what made you, obviously you had a good relationship with your boss, but what made you stay anyway? Like, hey, there's no document. You mentioned you like puzzles. Is it, I'm going to figure this out? Did you decide that you're going to document?
I did document a lot of things. Really? Yeah, I pretty much took that bull by the horns and I was like, I'm documenting this and you're going to like it. And by the time like I left, so pretty much just over a year later, like it went from like this much documentation to this much. Like because I pretty especially like when I gave my notice, he was like, make sure every single piece of documentation you've ever created since you've worked for me is like in tip-top shape. That way, I have obviously so there's less trouble for the next person or whoever it is, right? Because I think that like documentation is not just like for practical use, but it's there for longevity. Like I'm always saying like if my boss or whoever, someone important got hit by a bus, there should be someone that should be able to pick it up.
Yeah, I've been there, and it also I've always seen it as it frees me up from having to do that task.
Right.
Right, places where I've gone through and there's no documentation, one of the things I learned early on is, all right, if I document this, I can then, like you said, you can come in, hey, here you go. Sure, it's hey, if I get hit by a bus, somebody can pick it up, but also, here you go, you can now do this job. I can go learn the cool new thing, or all I can go figure else something out. And it's funny, I worked one place where I had documented a script that I had written. Mm-hmm. And I had somebody that I met, I didn't work with them directly, but we were in the same area, we worked together. And at one point he sends me a text with a snapshot of his picture. He's like, hey, look at this. And the last time this script had been updated was when I updated it and documented it. And he's like, I had to troubleshoot it because we did some upgrades. He's like, and he basically was thanking me. He's like, thanks. And I was like, for what? He's like, you told me exactly, like all your scripts, I went there exactly, this is what this does. This is what this does. This is how you use this. He goes, so I had no problems. And I thought he was texting me to find out, hey, how do I fix this? Or what's going on? And it was very much just like, oh, thanks for documenting this. I hadn't worked there in 3 years. And it was like, here you go. Appreciate it. I'm good to go.
Yeah, it's longevity. Like it'll outlive you.
And what made you leave that role and eventually end up going into this other MSP?
So my previous role was completely remote, and being the extrovert I am, I was starting to go crazy because I was like, I need social interaction outside of a phone call. But also because I was like, yeah, I'm learning, but I don't want to like go my whole career like just being completely remote and never having touched equipment. Like that wouldn't sit right with me. Like even though like I don't like networking, but like if I've never touched a patch panel, I'm probably going to get some side eye from people in the industry that have been there a while. Like, what do you mean you've never patched a cable? Is like, are you high? I'm like, no. I started this in the pandemic.
Well, yeah, some people might, right? And I think that's that old school mentality, but there's a lot of people that probably wouldn't because, I mean, if you were to do something in cloud networking, for example.
Yeah, that's what my associates was in.
So you're never going to touch physical gear. But I think it probably makes it easier for you to understand exactly what's going on.
Right. That was my biggest hurdle when I tried to learn networking in a complete remote position, is because I didn't have things to play with. You know, I didn't have just the equipment like in front of me. Like if I would have had that, it would have been much quicker, and I probably would have understood it a lot better, like right out of the gate. But when you're only like watching videos and you're watching basically hypotheticals or just reading something, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like for a lot of people, like, you know, I'm a very visual, I'm a very like hands-on kind of person. If I can play with it, I'll remember it. Because now I have more than one sense involved. Like I have touch involved and I have visual involved. I'm gonna remember it.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I previously recorded another episode, and that's what they touched on, right? It's like everybody learns differently, right? Like some people are visual, some people are audio, but if you have multiple ways, like you said, there's a better chance that you're gonna remember it for the long term, as opposed to for that moment. You can watch a video, hey, I understand how to configure this switch or create a route. You'll do it, okay, well now what? Whereas if you're touching it, if you're listening to it, you're understanding the concepts and you're getting it a lot faster.
Yeah, like, I mean, usually, like, it's one thing to just read it and then not really, and just for information purposes, and then you never touch it. But once you, like, start doing something, that it makes more sense. Like, and that's really the whole industry in general, is once you start doing something, it'll make a lot more sense why you're doing it. And, like, people are like, well, how do you survive in IT? And I'm like, just break shit and see how you fix it. Like, honestly.
And just get faster at fixing it.
Yeah. Because you'll find different ways to do things, and you'll find more efficient ways to do things.
And what made you go back? So if you're working at this MSP, you're picking up skills, why go back to school for your associates? Or your degree. I don't know if you're doing associates or bachelor's.
I'm going to go for bachelor's. I got the associates, but I'm going for bachelor's. I feel like, it's always something that I felt like I was going to do anyway. Like, get a bachelor's degree. Just, why not make it something I'm already doing? But B, I feel like I also have certs. Like, between education, certs, and experience, they all fill each other's gaps. Like, I feel like you get, like a basic cert first, like an A+ and maybe a Network+. When I passed the Network+ by 7 points, I cried out of happiness. Because that was the hardest one for me. Security+ wasn't even that hard for me by comparison, but it's also because, like, I took Network+. But they all fill each other in. Like, things I'm not, like, learning, things that maybe I don't learn at work, I get through school, vice versa. And it's actually happened within the last, like, year, almost 2 since I've been at my current job, where I get something will come up at work, and I'm like, oh, I'm literally doing an assignment on this right now.
It really helps you be more well-rounded.
Yeah.
At this point, right? Because you're right. I wouldn't say that there's any one right way. Like, people ask, like, should I get my degree? Should I get certs? Should I do this? I'm like, do both. Do one, do the other. But if you do just your certs, that's not going to be enough.
Right. It might help you get in the door at first, but, like, you have to, keep up with it. Like, and, that was actually one of my interview questions. How do you keep up with the industry? Well, when CrowdStrike makes, like, a third of the developed world go down, you kind of hear about it on the news. No, I read, like, Wired, TechCrunch, and things like that, and, various vendors' email lists. So it's just depending on, like, I even said that in my per speaker series. I'm like, it's kind of depending on what your taste is, because, like, you can have the couple of the big guys, like Wired and TechCrunch, but at the same time, it depends on, like, how people write, what's gonna attract you. It might be that maybe, I don't know, like, maybe someone like Pax8 maybe there's, like, an article that they write, or, another vendor like Huntress or something like that. And you're just kind of having to find what really catches your eye, like in the moment, but B, long term, because obviously these people have slightly different markets that they're going after.
And it's funny you mentioned, right, what catches your eye, what's going to resonate. And one of the reasons that I was really intrigued and wanted to bring you on is because you are newer to technology, right? You haven't been doing this for...
It's only like 3 years.
Right, 3 years. It's not, hey, I've got a 20-year career. So getting your perspective as somebody that's coming in new and trying to understand, like, what are some of the challenges that you're facing now? Or I know that you're still in school and you're kind of at the MSP, so you're still in the learning phase, but I guess let me phrase this question differently, is what's your goal once you get your degree and you've got now a couple years of experience with your MSP? What's the next role that you're looking to try and get to?
Well, I've thought about like where I want to go with my career, and it's going to be one of a couple different things. So I've got an interest in DevOps, because I feel like my programming skills are kind of rotting right now. But I love doing it. It's so much fun. Like, scripting is so much fun. I'm a script kiddie for sure. And every time I find like a reason to automate something, I will. I'm so annoying about it, and I'm like that annoying Linux user that's like, but wait, have you heard of Linux? There's a couple things that might happen. So it's either I'm going to become like a systems admin for either Windows or Linux, or DevOps, or something having to do like, more specifically with the clouds. Like, I actually met this girl in July. I went to Raleigh, North Carolina, just for a few days, the middle of July. And on my way back, I sat next to her, and she works for Red Hat, and she's in DevOps. And she's like, "Girl, like, you want to come work for us or some other company? Like, I'll let you in." Like, damn, you don't tell me twice.
And was that just based on your conversation of talking about what you do? Or?
Yeah, she started talking to me first, and like, we're sitting next to each other on a plane, and we got a few hours to go, so of course you're gonna talk to her. And she seems pretty cool, and we're like, we both have dark humor, and I was like, man, she's really cool. And she's like, no, I'm serious. Like, hit me up when you want to make a change. And that's sometimes how some of this happens, is like you just happen to sit next to him on a plane or some sort of public transit, and you're there for a while. Might as well make friends.
No, that's awesome. And definitely that's one of the biggest things that I think people don't realize at some point in their career. Like, it's one thing to make friends and have coworkers or colleagues, but really establishing a network and being somebody that people would enjoy working with is important. Like, you could be the smartest person, but if you're a pain in the butt to deal with,
100%.
I don't know that I want to work with you.
No, for sure. And the third thing is, I like, especially like down the line, I have an interest in like being like an automation engineer.
Okay.
Because I just love automation. It's almost unhealthy.
So you're going around things that you're finding interest and passion at. And do you think that, let's say you go into a DevOps role and you don't like it, seems like you're okay going through and saying, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm going to go try and just be an automation engineer or SRE or something like that. And SRE is a site reliability engineer. So is that kind of, are you okay, or is your goal to kind of try all of them and see which one?
I mean, it could end up really either way. It could be like, the autistic urge to hyper focus on something and get like the special interest level of knowledge. But like, if I'm not happy with something, I'm gonna change it. Like, that's just like, I've never been one to just stick with something and just, for the sake of stability. Like, if I am deeply miserable, I'm not gonna stay with something or someone. Like, I will honestly get rid of someone or something that doesn't make me happy real quick. And that's because it's like, life's too short.
And that comes from, a lot of people don't think that way, right? What, is it your personality? Is it something, was it the being overwhelmed? Like, what made you lead that? So I didn't get diagnosed until recently, but I have ADHD. And every 2 to 3 years, I was going on to a different role, right? A different job. And early on in my career, like I was like, oh, I'm working here. This is where I'm going to be. Like you said, that hyper focus. This is where I'm going to be. And I'd get to the point where I would get bored with it because there's not that challenge. And I'm like, all right, on to the next one. Like I'm out of here.
Well, anymore, it's like people are job hopping just to get pay raises every couple of years.
And that's not something I did until later on. And to me, it was just like, all right, I can't move up. There's really nothing for me to move over. And I'm tired of doing the same thing over and over.
Right.
Is it more your ADHD and your autism that leads to that? Or do you think personality? Is it combination of everything?
Probably a little of both. Like, the ADHD wants variety. The autism wants depth. But my personality wants something that will give me growth. Like, I feel like if you're not growing and you're becoming complacent, you're dying. Especially, like, for an industry that moves so fast. I mean, we have a new phone coming out every few months. Like, it's wild. I just got my Pixel 8 Pro in February, and Pixel 9 just got released. Like, and so I think it's a combination of all of them, where it's like, well, I like this part, but if I'm not getting, like, growth potential, or I'm not getting a raise or something like that, it's like, I'm kind of at the point where I'm not miserable at my current job, but if a new one came up with more money, I wouldn't say no.
What if a new one came up and maybe it's not more money, but you're doing something different?
I mean, it would really depend on, like, what I'm doing. Like, if I feel like it would have some potential to get me to where I want to be, or there's something, like, special about it, like, even if it was, like, the same, more or less, like, pay rate, I might take it. It just depends, like, because when people interview, I think a lot of people forget that you're interviewing them too. And I ask questions like, my current job, I asked, who is your longest employee who is your best employee and why are they your favorite?
And what was the answer they gave you?
Well, it was this guy named Brendan. His younger brother used to work for us too, and he left in April, but my boss was like, yeah, he's been here for a while, and he's always, like, very he's a great problem solver, and he's got a good temperament about him, and that question is twofold for me. So I'm asking, A, is there turnover? B, why do you like them?
And you're trying to understand that to know whether you're a good fit, or
right.
Are you also trying to find out what's going to get you either recognized, promoted?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, there's multiple things going into that question, but, I ask culture questions, and, like, I don't think a lot of people are expecting me to ask those right away, because people tend to, let me get past the interview and then I'll figure out the culture, but I need to know if this is toxic or not. Because that's a huge focus for people, like, right now, because people, especially since the pandemic, like, people are no longer putting up with toxicity in the workplace, like, at all. Like, if someone's, like, not worth, like, if the juice is not worth that squeeze, they're gone. And I love it for them, because it's about time people start waking up to the fact that this is adversely, like, affecting them in their other parts of life. You spend so much time at work, you better like it, at least tolerate it. I mean, sometimes you can't always help, like, certain people, certain events, but you should at least be able to not hate your life every time.
Yeah, I think if you're getting to the point where you are miserable getting up, you hate going to work, there's a problem.
It's time to go.
It's different. Like you said, there might be certain people like, hey, I don't like dealing with that person. Okay, you minimize your interactions, or you keep it just very professional. Like, hey, here's what I need from you, or here's what you needed from me. Here you go. I don't need to have a conversation with you. But if it's like that with everybody,
yeah, time to go.
I'm out.
Polish the resume and go.
Now, what other interview questions are you asking them to try and figure out culture? Are there any memorable ones that stand?
I'm thinking, so, well, I mean, sometimes I just ask the question, like, straight out, like, well, what's your guys' like, how, do you guys get along well here? Like, what's your culture like? And people are gonna laugh when they hear this, but like, if they say we're like a family, probably run, because families are dysfunctional.
I never would have thought of something like that, like as a dysfunctional, right? You're like, oh, like we're like a family.
But like, whose family are we comparing to? Mine's dysfunctional.
You're like, is this the Cosby Show? Right. Is this Modern Family? Like, what are we doing here?
Right.
Okay. And is there anything else? So instead of just questions, so how about interview prep? What are you doing? Granted, I know it's only been a couple interviews, but it sounds like you're very well informed, you're very educated and knowledgeable about how to go about, you're even methodical about, hey, I need to ask these types of questions. Is this from networking with people and in, the Toastmasters in that area? Is that where you're picking this up? Because for most people, at least for me at first, early on in my career, I was not doing that.
Well, I like to do recon on people. Like, I don't know if it's just like low-key stalker energy, but like when I got the email from my current boss that he says, I want to bring you in for an interview, I immediately go on LinkedIn and I look him up. And I was like, okay, how long has he been with this company? What has he done before and all that? I look up the company, obviously, itself too. But I wanted to know who he is, and I find out he's got a finance degree from UNLV, he's a vice president of operations, and so I understand that finance usually controls operations. They usually report to each other in major organizations. And so I knew that, that's who I'm dealing with. Like, if you can, do research on the person. Like, if you know who it is, you have a name, look them up on LinkedIn. Like, it doesn't hurt, and you can kind of get a feel of like what they might be like once you get in front of them. Because I remember how I said I like humor and I like dark humor. He asked me a question that I don't think anyone else might have answered this way. He says, what do you define as good customer service? And I thought about it for about half a second, and I knew I was going to make him laugh with this. And I said, what keeps the invoices paid?
That's probably not an answer he's ever gotten before.
He did laugh. Because I knew he was a finance guy. And I knew that that's like something that he would deal with. So the fact that like he probably figured it out in that moment, like, oh, she looked me up.
And that's something, huge advantage now as opposed to, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but I don't remember there being really LinkedIn when I started, right? Like you couldn't look it up. Later on, I was able to do that. But being able to find ways to connect with whoever you're interviewing with that person, I'm sure even if, let's say the interview, not saying that it went terrible, but let's say it was like, it was an okay, that interview probably, or that answer that you gave to that question probably put you in the top of his mind. And he's like, if nothing else, you were memorable. You left, if he interviewed 50 people, he was like, Liz, I remember her because she's the one that says what gets the invoices paid.
Yeah, like, they pretty much kind of built this team like up from scratch again because, there were people that left in COVID, and then he was like, yeah, we're hiring like a few people because like there was already one that started like a couple weeks before, another one that just like was about to start, which were my coworkers. And then, I also did ask, like, do you have any women in this organization? That are techs, and he's like, you would be the first. Like, I kind of want to know, like, by asking if you have any women in this organization, it's seeing how do you deal with women, but also how do customers deal with them? Because there were a few times that I've been confused for a receptionist. I was like, do you want to try that again?
That's got to be an interesting... an interesting situation, right? Like, what do you mean? And I would have thought that would be probably not as common now, but apparently Still
It's happened a couple times.
Okay.
Where, can I speak to a tech? I'm like, you are though, and I know more than my male colleagues.
And when they said that you would be the first, was that not a red flag for you, or were there follow-up questions to that? Because to your point, right, how do you deal with women if they say, well, you would be the first? What did that initially...
So he actually kind of preemptively calmed the potential red flag situation down, because he said, I've helped people hire women technicians before, but we haven't had one here yet. So he's had experience with, women in the field. It just never got around to that. So I was like, okay, that seems reasonable, like whatever. Well, it turns out my friend Heather had previously interviewed for the same company, and she was like, oh yeah, I know all those guys over there, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And she's like, why? I'm like, why didn't you take it? And because I got more money from a different job.
That's a good reason.
Right.
And so then that obviously probably set you at ease, and you're like, all right, I'm cool. I'm all right being the first one. And obviously there hasn't been any issue with you in that.
Well, now there's another girl. There has been for a year. So she came last July, and like we get along like oil and gasoline.
Nice. Well, I think I've touched on at least as much as I can kind of remember from looking at your job history. We touched on a couple items that I wasn't aware of, like the Toastmasters was something it's been of interest to me. I thought about joining, but it was really more just on the speech, presentation side. Like, it's something I've always been interested in. I'm always trying to improve my communication skills, especially as you start to move up. I've gotten to the point now in certain roles where I'm dealing with directors, C-level, and they speak at a whole different level.
They do.
And at that point, they're not... I can talk to somebody technical all day, no problem, but when I first started going in...
I deal with executives all day long.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they love me.
And I'm sure a lot of it is that the skills that you've picked up in Toastmasters, right? Being able to understand, because it's not just speeches, it's also business, leadership, and those skills come through. So is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think was something I should touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you got pretty much everything. Like, I deal with people of all kinds, and well, I guess like one thing I'll say is, like, I deal from everyone from like the housekeeper to like the CEO. Like, I've given him like a webcam and set it up for him before in his office. Like, ultimately just treat them like people. Like, their title really means nothing. And I think people get, especially when they're brand new to like an organization, they're like, oh my God, this person's like a bigwig. I'm like, they still shower every day. Like, they still put their shoes on the same way you do. They're just people.
And just find a way to connect with them, right? On a personal level. Like, it's not like, hey, be respectful, but find a way to engage with them.
Right.
I mean, you have LinkedIn, you have all these different ways. I'm sure you can find something about them to be able to, like you said in your interview, something that I can say to relate to them, make them laugh, make them remember me, or just even humanize them and get a conversation going. It's probably...
Yeah, I'm always talking to people when I'm trying to fix their issues, especially like if I'm like, they're right next to me, because I make conversation because I don't want it to be awkward silence.
You don't want them just sitting there staring over your shoulder?
Yeah, like, staring is weird, bro. like just staring at you, it's like, okay, this is super awkward. But like, if I know they're in the sports, I'll talk sports, or like I'll find out that they're in the sports. Like, I've talked to like a CFO about college football, because like I've been into sports my whole life, and with some of the ladies, like a couple of them have commented on my nail polish colors, because they're always like wild, crazy colors, and I got one of them a bottle for her birthday, because she was like, oh, I really like that, and I'm like, oh, your birthday's coming up.
I guess the one thing that I think I didn't touch on that I think would be of value, and I try to ask most of the guests, is how do you go about acquiring new skills. So I know that you're a pretty curious person, but now sure you're going through and you're doing college, coding and a number of these things. I know you like to be hands-on, but let's say now if you want to get a DevOps role and someone says, hey, you need to learn X skill, like what's the process that you go through, or how are you going through to figure it out? Are you watching videos? Are you just, I'm going to find a course that teaches me?
I mean, I guess it depends on like what it is. Like if I was gonna learn like Ansible or something, like I might find videos to get, you know, some background on it. But otherwise, like if you can lab it, like that's probably the best way to go. Like find some, like either architect the environment on your home computer, or find something like there's Linode for like Linux VMs and stuff where you can just log in and you have your own VM and you do whatever you want. Where if you can just start messing with it, and that's how it's always started with me, is like, well, I want to learn how to do this. Okay, so how do I do, like, and I'll think of something, simple at first, like how do I, if I was doing web design, how do I make a page? How do I make it look pretty? How do I add content to it? And how do I make it interactive? And then you start asking all these other questions to yourself and Google, and you start having about 100 Google tabs.
As that ADHD is just not closing them until you know that
well,
it's completed.
It's kind of like I have a tab open for one thing and then a tab open for another thing, and it's very compartmentalized. And then at some point they become my emotional support tabs.
They become more my to-do list. Like as I'm going through and learning, or I go down a rabbit hole, I'm like, okay, I'll group them together. I'm like, okay, this is for this task that I'll get back to at some point.
Right, if you ever do, but that's kind of how I am, is like I start thinking like, well, how do I do something simple, and then I figure out how to do it, and then over time I'm like, oh, what happens if I do this and I do this and I do this, and start adding on to it, and that's really what it is. Like the intellectual curiosity, like has to be the driver of that bus, in my opinion, because if you don't have it, then you're not going to even be like inclined to look for it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been extremely entertaining and informative for me, and I'm sure, I hope people get just as much value out of it as I have. And I would be very interested in, a couple years, once you've got your degree and you start kind of progressing on, bringing you back and just kind of get an update. And maybe at some point you're like, hey, I'm at Red Hat now, and now I'm the DevOps engineer, or I'm the manager, or maybe somewhere else. I mean, it's amazing the amount of opportunities that are available to people, and one of the goals here is to expose people to, the different roles that there's available, professions. Like you said, if you're not curious and if you don't enjoy it, I mean, there's technology everywhere. Someone mentioned that sports, DevOps, there's, I had somebody in their own business, like automation and all kinds of things. So really the sky's the limit, especially now. Like technology's everywhere. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming in, and
it's been fun.
Yes, I definitely. And with that, thank you everybody for tuning in, and whether you're watching or listening, please subscribe, like, comment, and really help me understand what types of roles or what types of people you're looking to learn more from. And really the whole reason I'm doing this is to help the community and have you learn from others, from their successes, from their failures, and really avoid you having to go through a lot of those pain points that a lot of us, me included, have gone through in our careers. So plug in and download the knowledge.